My name is Maurice. I am 58 years old. When you've lived more than half your life, you think you've seen all the moments a man can be proud of. But standing here in this borrowed suit, watching my daughter Liana look as beautiful as a dream, all I feel is a hollow, aching space in my chest. Preston, her groom, just glanced at me with a look I know too well. He looked at me like I was a stain on the expensive tapestry of his life, and then he started leading his boss toward me. Before we walk into that wedding reception together, I have to ask, where are you listening to this from? Are you in a small town where everyone knows your business, or a big city where you can feel invisible in a crowd? Let me know down in the comments. And if you want to stay and hear how an ordinary man like me found his way back to his own dignity, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep sharing these stories, my foundation, my pride. It was built long before anyone mentioned a wedding. I was a mechanic, a machine technician. Not the kind with a computer, but the kind with grease under his fingernails and a feel for the language of metal. I worked at Carrington Manufacturing, an auto parts plant, for 32 years. It was work that made your back ache by the end of the shift, but it built a decent life. It bought this modest little house I'm still in. It put my daughter Liana through college. I remember Saturday afternoons, her sitting on a stool in the garage watching me work on our old car. I taught her the difference between a hex head and a Phillips, how to torque a bolt just enough so you don't strip the threads. She looked at me with pure admiration back then. I was her hero. All of that ended on a Tuesday afternoon 7 years ago. A big hydraulic press, a beast I'd operated for years, seized up. With the foolish confidence of a man who knew his machine, I tried to clear the jam. There was a sharp hiss of compressed air, a pain like lightning through my lower back, and then darkness. I woke up in the hospital. The year that followed was surgeries, physical therapy, and a dull ache that never truly left. When I could finally walk without a cane, I went back to the plant. Hope a fragile thing in my hands. The new manager, a young guy with an expensive tie, saw me in his office. He talked about restructuring, about workforce optimization. My position, he said, with fake sympathy, had been consolidated. They offered me an early retirement package, a pittance compared to what I'd built. I hired a lawyer, a tired-looking man. We lost. The company had an army of them. They said I hadn't followed some new safety protocol, a piece of paper I'd never been given to sign. That was it. My career, my pride, packed into a cardboard box from my locker. The years after that were a quiet war. Sending out hundreds of applications, most vanishing into silence. Interviews where I saw the interviewer's eyes glaze over the moment I mentioned my age and the gap in my resume. The savings slowly drained. I cut back on everything. But in front of Liana, a young woman in college by then, I kept up the act. "I'm all right, sweetheart," I'd always say. "I'm weighing my options." Then Preston arrived. Liana brought him home for dinner. Preston Sterling III. He was 32 in finance, with a quick talker's smile that showed two perfect teeth. He shook my hand firmly, too firmly. Over the meal, he talked about the stock market, about trips to Aspen and Cabo. Then he turned to me. "And what about you, Mr. Maurice? Do you have a long-term financial plan?" "At your stage, planning is crucial." I said I was exploring opportunities. He nodded, his eyes sweeping our humble living room. "I see. I could probably put in a word for some part-time security gigs at my building. Nothing demanding, but it's something." That offer, packaged as a favor, burned my pride. But for Liana, I just smiled and said I'd think about it. When Liana announced their engagement 6 months later, my heart clenched. I saw the light in her eyes, the genuine happiness. For that, I hugged her and congratulated her. but a cold dread had started to curl in my gut, a premonition that I was about to lose my daughter in another deeper way. The escalation, the quiet disdain began as soon as the wedding plans took shape. It was no longer family dinners, but meetings at upscale restaurants with Preston's parents, Brenda and Sterling Jr. They were polished people who spoke in soft, definitive tones. Every conversation circled back to Preston's achievements, the historic hotel they'd booked, the string quartet they'd hired. When I quietly offered to contribute even a little, Sterling Jr. put a heavy ringed hand on my arm. "Maurice, my friend, don't you worry about that. We have it all handled. We just want you to enjoy your role as father of the bride." It wasn't generosity. It was a way of saying I had no place, that my role was ceremonial. Preston was more subtle. Once when we were alone, he said, "Mr. Maurice, I think it's great you can focus on your health now. It must be such a burden to worry about a career at your age." Each time I swallowed my anger. I tried talking to Liana. "Honey, I just want to make sure he really sees you," I said carefully one evening. Liana, with the flushed cheeks of a bride-to-be, grew defensive. "You don't understand, Dad. Preston is good to me. He's driven, and he knows what he wants. That's what I need." I saw an impatience in her eyes, a distance forming. My best friend Ray, who runs an old radio repair shop down the street, dragged me out for a beer. Ray, a big man with a carefully trimmed beard, stared at me over his pint. "Maurice, you gotta speak up. That kid looks right through you, and he's pulling your girl away." I shook my head. "I can't, Ray. It's her big day. I won't be the troublesome father, the one who ruins everything." Ray's voice dropped. "Sometimes silence ain't golden, my friend. Sometimes it's just consent." But I was too tired from fighting. Then came the suit. A week before the wedding, Preston showed up at my house carrying a bag from a fancy menswear store. "Mr. Maurice," he said, beaming, "I know wedding planning is hectic, so I took the liberty of picking out a suit for you to wear. Your old one, well, it seemed a bit dated for the tone of the event. I want everything perfect for Liana." He handed me the bag. The fabric felt like liquid. I felt small, like a child being handed a costume. I took it my thanks, sticking in my throat. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room under the yellow glow of an old lamp. I looked at the pictures on the mantel, me and Liana at a theme park, me in my plant uniform, smiling with coworkers. And I looked at the engraved brass pocket watch, the gift from my old friends at Carrington, inscribed to Maurice, the golden hands. It had stopped ticking years ago. I picked it up, felt its cold weight. I felt just like it, a mechanism out of rhythm left on a shelf, while the world outside the window kept spinning. The culmination of it all happened on the wedding day itself. The Grantham Hotel was an old limestone building with huge columns and carpets so thick you could get lost in them. A live orchestra played classical music. The air smelled of lilies and expensive perfume. I wore the suit Preston gave me. It fit perfectly, like I was wearing someone else's skin. I stood alone near a cocktail table, trying to look like I belonged. I caught the eye of one of Preston's uncles, a man with a meticulously trimmed mustache. He sidled over. "Ah, you're the bride's father, he asked, his tone dripping with curiosity. "I heard you were, well, enjoying your leisure time." A few people nearby tittered. Blood rushed to my face, but I just nodded and turned away. Then I saw Preston. He was leading a man over. This man carried a different kind of gravity. He wore a tasteful charcoal gray suit, his silver hair cut close. This was Arthur Finch. Preston looked like he was trying too hard, nodding eagerly. They walked straight toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Preston put a hand on my shoulder, a false gesture of familiarity. "Mr. Finch, sir. Allow me to introduce my fiancé's father, Maurice." Preston lowered his voice, but still loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. He's been on an extended sabbatical. Finding his motivation, you know how it is. But a good sport. I could feel every eye in the vicinity turn to me. Shame burned through me, hot and sharp as acid. I tried to keep my face neutral, nodding at the man named Finch. Arthur Finch didn't speak immediately. He studied me, his blue-gray eyes moving from my face to my hands and back to my eyes. A polite, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. Preston, misinterpreting the silence as encouragement, chuckled and went on. "I have to say, I admire him, Mr. Finch. Even without a successful career like ours, he stays optimistic. A lesson for us all, right, Arthur?" Finch slowly turned his head. The polite smile vanished. His voice was low, clear, and carried a weight that cut through the party noise. Preston. Just the one word, and it silenced him. "Did you just call the man who pulled me from the wreckage of a UH-1 Huey, in a place I don't even like to remember, and the only engineer I ever respected enough to offer a business partnership, an unemployed loser, finding his motivation?" The space around us went completely quiet. Preston's face went from flushed to paper white. Arthur Finch didn't stop. "Your astounding arrogance and your profound lack of judgment in assessing others, particularly the father of your fiancé, has made one thing abundantly clear. You are an unacceptable liability to Finch and Sterling Capital Management. You're fired. Effective immediately. Please surrender all company devices and property to my assistant by start of business Monday." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Preston stood there, mouth agape like a fish on a dock. I looked at Arthur Finch, and in that moment, memory flooded back. A wet forest, smoke, the groan of metal. Not the face of a CEO, but the face of a terrified young man, pinned under a bent steel beam, after the people around us began to murmur, and Preston was pulled away by his family. Arthur Finch placed a light hand on my arm. "Maurice, we should talk somewhere quieter." He led me down a quiet hallway away from the chaotic crowd. My mind was still reeling. "Arthur Finch," I muttered. "Lieutenant Finch." He nodded, a sad shadow crossing his features. "It's been a long time, Sergeant Walker." That old title sounded foreign. We sat on a padded bench in an alcove. He looked at me intently. "I never got the chance to thank you properly. You saved my life that day." I shook my head. "Someone else would have." "No," he said firmly. "Not everyone has the calm to find the shear point to use a bent wrench as a lever. You have a singular mechanical mind, Maurice. I never forgot that." He paused, then continued. "And I never forgot when I sought you out, must be 15 years ago now. My company was growing. I needed a technical partner, someone who understood production. I remembered you. I offered you a partnership. You refused." That memory came into sharp focus. Arthur, already a successful businessman by then, had come to see me at home. He had a design for a new clutch assembly more efficient. It was clever, but it was based on a principle I'd sketched during break time at Carrington on company-owned drafting paper. I'd explained it to Arthur. "That design, it shares too much with the work I'm doing at the plant. I can't. It's not right." Arthur had looked at me so long, I thought he'd be angry. Then he just nodded. "I understand. Integrity is a rare commodity, Maurice. I respect your decision." Now, in the hotel hallway, Arthur said, "I never forgot your choice. In my world, people sell their conscience for far less. Preston, for all his degrees and polish, would never understand what you possess." A bittersweet validation washed over me. But then something else rose up, a long-suppressed fury. I stood up. Arthur, I appreciate what you just said. I truly do. And I'm grateful you did that with Preston. But I don't need pity. I've sat silent and let myself be defined as a failure for too long, even in my own daughter's eyes. That ends today. I turned back toward the ballroom. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. This time, it was from resolve. I walked back and searching for Liana. I saw her in a corner, arguing with Preston, tears streaking her makeup. Diane, her mother, was trying to intervene. I walked over. People quieted as I approached. Preston looked at me, his expression a mix of venom and terror. You, he stammered. I held up a hand, cutting him off. I didn't speak to Preston. I turned to Liana. Sweetheart. My voice was low but clear. I am sorry. I am sorry for being silent. I let my own shame about losing my job, about feeling useless, make me forget who I am. I let it make me forget I was a man you once looked up to. Then I turned to Preston. And you. You were wrong about me. But worse, you were wrong about my daughter. You saw her as an accessory, a decoration for the perfect, successful image you were trying to paint. You never saw her intelligence, her compassion, her actual strength. She deserves far more than a man who looks down on everyone else. I looked at Liana one last time. I love you. I'll always be here. And then I turned and walked away. I walked out of the ballroom, leaving the noise, the blinding lights, and all the pretense behind. I walked outside the cool night air, hitting my lungs. I took off the tie from the suit Preston gave me and dropped it in a trash can. I felt like I had woken up from a long sleep. The aftermath unfolded like a wave. The next morning, as I was making coffee in my quiet kitchen, the phone rang. It was Ray. Good Lord, Maurice, are you hearing what's going around? His voice was electric with excitement. The whole town is talking. About some finance bigshot firing the groom right at the wedding. They're saying Preston is blackballed in the city. No firm will touch him now. I just listened, feeling strangely calm. Not triumphant, just still. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. Liana stood there, eyes puffy, no makeup. She walked in and hugged me, sobbing into my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm sorry for everything. I was blind. I let him. I let them make me think you weren't enough. I was so selfish. I patted her back, letting her cry it out. When she'd calmed, we sat down. She told me about the pressures Preston and his family put on her, how to dress, how to act, how to slowly distance herself from old friends. I thought if I had that life, it would prove I'd made it. She said, her voice thick with shame. I lost myself. I held her hand. We can all get lost, honey. It's about finding the way back. A few days later, the phone rang again. An unknown number. I answered. Maurice, Arthur Finch. I'm not calling out of pity. I'm calling because I have a business proposition, and I need your consultation. We met at his office. Arthur outlined a new project, a small-scale manufacturing shop specializing in high-performance parts for electric vehicles, focusing on sustainable, repairable design. I need a director of technical operations, he said bluntly. Someone who understands metal and machinery, but also professional ethics. Someone who knows how to build something that lasts. I thought of you. This is not a favor, Maurice. This is an investment in experience I know is real. I sat there listening. For the first time in years, someone was speaking of my skills as an asset, not a liability. I didn't answer right away. I said I needed to think. At home, I sat in my garage workshop, where my old tools were still kept in good order. I realized my worth wasn't dependent on Arthur Finch remembering me. It was in what I could do, in the principles I hadn't abandoned. Arthur recognizing it was just an external confirmation of an internal truth. I called Arthur back and agreed to meet as an independent technical consultant for the project's initial phase. I stressed the word independent. He agreed. It was a position of negotiation I hadn't held in years. The healing wasn't a straight line, but a series of small, deliberate steps. The consulting work started part-time. I was rusty. The technology had advanced, but the core principles were the same. Arthur was a demanding but respectful client. He listened. My opinions carried weight. The first paycheck I deposited wasn't large, but it was earned. It felt different. With Liana, we began rebuilding slowly. We had dinners that weren't about impressing anyone. She talked about maybe going back to school for graphic design, a passion she'd put aside. I told her about the consulting work, not as a boast, but as a simple fact. She was proud. I could see it. One afternoon, I drove down to Ray's shop. The bell above the door jingled. He looked up from an old tube radio, his face breaking into a wide grin. Well, look what the cat dragged in. The man of the hour. We didn't talk much about the wedding. We drank coffee and talked about carburetors and transistor radios. It was normal. It was healing. I even visited my ex-wife Diane. We had a civil, quiet conversation on her porch. I apologized for the distance I'd let grow for the pride that kept me isolated. She apologized for not seeing how deep my struggle went. We made peace not as a couple, but as Liana's parents. The heaviest work was internal. I had to forgive myself. For the shame, for the silence, for believing the narrative others wrote for me. I took the engraved pocket watch from the mantel. I didn't try to wind it. I just held it, acknowledging what it represented. A past chapter, not my entire story. I placed it back, not as a monument to loss, but as a reminder of where I'd been. One evening, Liana came over with a sketchbook. She showed me designs for a logo for a potential freelance business. They were good. We ordered pizza and talked about fonts and color palettes. In that ordinary moment in my simple living room, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in a decade. I wasn't a hero, and I wasn't a loser. I was just Maurice. And for the first time in a long, long time, that felt like more than enough. So that's the journey from that hollow feeling in a borrowed suit to this quiet contentment in my own skin. What did I learn? I learned that a man's value isn't printed on a business card or deposited in a bank account. It's forged in the choices he makes when no one is watching. It's measured by the integrity he holds on to when it would be easier to let go, and by the courage it takes to finally speak his own name when the world has tried to rename him. They can take your job. They can try to diminish you, but they can only take your dignity if you hand it to them. And as for that old watch, last week I picked it up again. On a whim, I gave the crown a gentle turn. There was a faint, hesitant tick, then another. The second hand gave a little jump and began its slow, steady sweep around the dial. It just needed to be remembered. Maybe we all do. Before I go, I'd like to ask you something. In your own life, what's one small thing you've done recently that quietly affirmed your own worth, your own dignity? Maybe it was setting a boundary, finishing a project, or simply choosing kindness when it was hard. Share it in the comments below. Let's remind each other. If this story resonated with you, if it felt real, please give it a like. It lets me know what matters to you. And if you want to join me for more honest conversations about the quiet battles and hard-won peace of everyday life, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And if you know someone who might need to hear this today, please share it. You never know whose spirit you might help lift. Thank you for listening. Truly. Take care of yourselves, and remember you are more than the labels the world tries to stick on you.